the women who attended that event felt like they were just kind of being served up on a silver platter to all the like male execs that came from Blizzard.
All right. Hey, Gary.
Hi, Mr. Blair. I'm so glad that you did not do your normal intro where you go, sup G. So thank you
Okay,
for that.
I'm trying to change. I'm trying to diversify the way we start the podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't we can probably land on something, just something better than sup G. I don't know. It sounds weird to me. So yeah.
Well, next time, maybe next time we'll have ChatGPT write our introduction.
Okay, yeah. And we just call that up. Okay. ChatGPT chooses us to do this type of intro.
Yeah, we'll have them pick something at random.
All right.
Or
cool.
it. I guess we can't gender the AI yet. All right. So what did we do this week?
What did you do this week? Okay, so you basically it was you interviewing your friend Yiyi. We had some technical difficulties.
Yeah, so for anyone listening to the podcast, you guys could probably hear Gary. Yiyi and I could not. And we had started, and Gary was a little bit late, so we didn't have any time to properly test the audio and get it sorted out beforehand. But Yiyi and I could not hear Gary because we were actually record the podcast live at Gumbo, first time ever, which was kind of cool. And we had Gary joined again remotely, but he joined late, so we couldn't do proper tests. So anyone listening could hear Gary, but Yiyi and I could not.
But at the same time, like when you were recording the podcast, I thought that the interview like flowed really well. So anything that I would have had to say would just kind of feel like I was interrupting that flow. So
yeah, we covered a lot. It was actually was one of my favorite. It was kind of short. We only did about 30 minutes, but that's fine. Yeah, we talked about something non-game related, but certainly something that means a lot to me, and that's immigration, because I am an immigrant to the United States. And so is Yiyi, and she talks a little bit about that. She's an immigration lawyer. She talks about her experience with that, and we get into a bunch of game stuff. She talks about some GDC stuff, some wonderful misogyny that's still going on in the industry, and I'm not being serious when I say wonderful for anyone who thinks that I would be. And we also talk about all the stuff that she's working on, because she's heavily into the game world as well.
okay, so for someone that isn't necessarily familiar with what GDC is, can you
Yes, the Game Development Conference in San Francisco. It's been going on. I can't remember when it first started, but it's been a long time now. And it is still one of the few, I think, expos that still actually is held in San Francisco proper. I've walked by it a few times when I still live there. I've never gone to it. I think Gary and I were planning to go in 2024. Hopefully.
That'd be cool. I would like to check it out.
Yeah,
so to try to, I guess, get a concept of like the size of this GDC conference, like how much bigger would you say it is compared to MegFest or?
Well, it's not really an expo like MegFest or Too Many Games or even like Play NYC. It's more conferencey, focused specifically on developers. I actually don't know how big it is. It is big, but yeah, I don't know what numbers. I've never looked that information up. I'm sure we could.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll just get into the podcast.
All right. Enjoy meeting Yiyi, everyone, and check out the Couch Zone at Gumbo. Yiyi, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So you have been, well, I've known you for a few years now, mostly through Gumbo and the video game scene, but I don't know you all that well, all things considered. So why don't you tell us about yourself?
Oh, well, that's a big,
very open question. I know.
I am someone who likes to do a lot of different things. That's kind of how I met you. Is one of my interests is in the indie game dev scene in New York City. So we met through a lot of friends who are indie developers, hanging around, doing play testing, supporting each other, doing a lot of community work. Other than that, I like to make art. I make art for video games. I also make games myself. I am a lawyer and I am really, really interested in tabletop RPGs. So I'm in multiple RPG campaigns, and that is probably my favorite extracurricular hobby activity.
Do you play Dungeons and Dragons?
I do play Dungeons and Dragons. That's one of my campaigns. I'm trying to branch out more to play less popular things. So my friends and I are playing Pulp Cthulhu is one of our campaigns, and also AD&D, just like old version of D&D, and we are in a Pathfinder Starfinder campaign.
Sweet. I used to play AD&D back in the day.
Yeah.
And I played fifth edition as well, more recently. All right. So you said you're a lawyer.
I am, yeah.
So you're an immigration attorney.
I am, yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
There's a lot to talk about that. I guess I can go over why I got into it. I am an immigrant myself. I came to the US from China when I was 5 years old and sort of experienced firsthand how hard family separation was, because my parents came to this country first when I was 2, and we had to be separated for 3 years while they set up a life here in the United States. They came here with negative $7,000 and like just in heavy debt and like trying to build a life for us so that I could join them when I turned 5 and came here. So since then, that's sort of been a motivation for me to help other people in the immigration space and people who are trying to seek better lives for themselves in this country. And that's why I decided to become an immigration lawyer. Yeah.
So do you do that full time though? Because I get the impression you've got a lot on your plate. So
I do not do that full time. I did that full time for about a year out of law school. I did the traditional like first year associate path. I also did a little bit of work in the nonprofit advocacy space, still in immigration. And I decided a year in that culturally it just wasn't for me. First year associate work is very grueling and demanding. It's like you're expected to be in 7 a.m., you leave 7 p.m., and it's like unheard of for you to have work-life balance.
Yeah, I mean, I could appreciate why that'd be a little much.
So I decided that I still wanted to do immigration work. I still wanted to help people, but it was not going to be full-time work for me. So I currently do volunteer work. I mostly work with asylum seekers and refugees, and occasionally work with like trafficking victims and U visa people and such. Yeah.
So all the very politically charged stuff right now.
It is pretty politically charged. It's been challenging for sure. Like the Trump administration was not great for immigration policy in this country, and the Biden administration has continued a lot of the same policies. The country is just a little antagonistic to foreigners coming in right now.
Oh, no shit.
Especially like post-COVID, there's just been a little bit more xenophobia and fear.
I can't say that. I've talked many times on the podcast that while Gary's in Canada, I'm from Canada. I went through the immigration process as well, and I certainly didn't come here alone, separated from my parents like you did. Well, I did come here alone, but I wasn't not as a kid. I mean, but it is a very lonely process. Americans don't really give a shit if you're from somewhere else or what you're going through when you talk to them about immigration, because they just have no concept of what is going on or what it's even like. Yeah. So you sort of have the feeling of like, I could be sent home, like, or with employment-based immigration, because I came on an H1 or TN, then an H1. And for those who don't know what any of that stuff is, TN used to be the NAFTA free trade visa. I think they probably renamed it ever since all that stuff was renegotiated. The H1B is the professional visa for skilled workers. And then I eventually got a green card, but you need an employer to sponsor all that. And my first employer here didn't want to sponsor didn't really want to sponsor my green card until it was the absolute last minute to do it. And I had a friend of mine who they missed the deadline. And so she rage quit, and then she ended up getting married. So she's still here. It was a legitimate marriage and everything.
I find that a lot of employers sort of use it as a leverage point to retain talent in sort of an unethical way, because they know that you are tethered to them as long as they do not give you a path to permanent status.
I think the big companies are really bad for that.
Yeah.
My experience with my current employer was phenomenal, but I also negotiated up front. It's like, I want it in my contract that you'll do this. And they said, okay, we'll do it. We have to wait a year. It's like, that's fair.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they
Because
did
it's
it.
an expensive process for them also. Yeah.
And yeah, that was a lot better. I got it, my green card May of 2014, so it's almost another anniversary for me there.
Congratulations.
And I think I mentioned to you what my citizenship process was like. So let this be some advice for anyone who's listening who happens to want to become a US citizen. Don't apply on the day that you are eligible. Wait like another week or two. The website I discovered, they actually, when you apply online, there's a field where you enter the date your green card was issued, which was exactly 5 years from the date. It said you're eligible. So it's like, okay, I went through, did all the application, paid the like $1,000 fee or whatever it was. And then I go in for my interview, like almost a year later, and they're like, you applied a day early. I'm like, what?
Oh.
They tried to deny me right there. I think the guy who was interviewing me is being a jerk. I argued with him, and then I passed the test and everything. Then they magically lost my file.
Oh no.
So I waited 2 months. There was no ceremony date, oath ceremony date letter ever sent. I talked to a lawyer, and then I ended up writing a letter saying, look at my file, basically.
Yeah.
And it was like, as soon as I sent that letter, that's when things magically started moving forward again.
That's good. I'm glad you were able to find some recourse. Yeah, that's also one of the tough parts of immigration process in the US is a lot of it is discretionary. So the person who was a jerk to you probably maybe just had a bad day and decided like, I'm going to give this person a hard time because I do not see them necessarily as a human who has struggled through this whole process already. I'm in a bad mood and they missed it by a day. So technically I can get them on this. And that's what happens. And sometimes you get like good judges and good officers.
Yeah, I've heard great stories from some of them. They're
Yeah.
very friendly. Like, also, when I went and do my fingerprints for it, I was gonna be out of the country when my scheduled date was.
Mhm.
So I tried to go in early, and the woman said, no, but it's like I said, I'm not gonna be in town. She said, come back in the afternoon, and I did. There was no line. She just did it right away.
That's great.
So yeah, but the way it ended for me wasn't great, but overall I got through it. But it was it's not fun. I don't wish this upon anyone.
It is absolutely not. Yeah.
So maybe we should get a little bit off immigration and talk more about games, though.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about games.
You were recently at GDC.
I was. Yeah.
And how was that?
It was great. It was my first GDC. GDC is something I've always wanted to go to, but it's prohibitively expensive. It's in San Francisco, which is a
not
really
cheap.
really, really expensive place to stay. The conference itself is expensive to get passes to. Even the like lowest tier is about $100 or something. And that only gets you like 2 days of access. So if you're going to go all the way there, you kind of want more than that. So I was able to go to GDC this year as a speaker and also as part of the conference associate program, which is basically you work for GDC for up to 25 hours in exchange for a badge. And it's a helpful badge. It's the all access pass, so I could attend all the talks and sessions that I wanted. And so I think it's great that program exists, but I wish that overall it was more accessibly priced for everyone.
The hotels in San Francisco aren't cheap either. So Did you stay with the other gumbos, or?
I stayed with 2 other gumbo people. Yeah.
Nice. So you made a TikTok after you got back from the GDC about some of the negative experience.
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
Sorry if we could talk about that.
There was I decided to start a TikTok at GDC because I was frustrated with being in San Francisco and I just wanted to kvetch about being in San Francisco. But yes, after GDC, I personally had a pretty good experience with GDC, both working and speaking. But after GDC, it started coming out that there were problems with women being sexually harassed and assaulted, and also people getting roofied at multiple industry events at GDC. And it was a disturbing dark side that I at the time had no exposure to or awareness. So I was just like going about like doing my networking and stuff, and only afterward did I hear about all these things that happened. Yeah.
Oh wow. I mean, like there has been some of that toxic behavior in certainly the game industry forever. I thought especially like because EA, I believe, had some issues come out in the media in the last few years. I thought the industry was starting to clean itself up.
Not really, no. Like this is not the first time people have been roofied in exactly the same manner at GDC, I believe. And like a couple years ago, there was a Women in Games International event that was sponsored by Activision Blizzard, where the women who attended that event felt like they were just kind of being served up on a silver platter to all the like male execs that came from Blizzard. They described it as a hunting ground.
Oh my God.
So
That's horrible.
That was a big problem. And hearing about these things that happened this year at GDC, it's pretty clear that there's still a long way to go for the industry to improve, and a lot of cleanup that needs to happen.
What do we need to do here? Like, what more needs to change before some of this toxic behavior finally goes away? Because like the industry, like the tech industry, has gotten a lot better in this regard overall, but games seems to be the last holdout of some of this misogyny.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem because it's a passion industry. People will do what it takes to get into games more so than tech. Tech is just less sexy and glamorous and exciting. That's why you hear about a lot of like interns being exploited and doing a lot of free labor for game companies. And you hear about women or other marginalized groups putting up with bad behavior toward them because
they
this
really
is their shot, this is their foot in the door. And I think, I mean, a large
like Hollywood.
yeah, exactly. Like Harvey Weinstein. But I think a large part of it is just accountability by the big companies and studios and publishers. They need to hold the people who represent them at these spaces accountable and name them and shame them and like actually do something about them to set an example. There's a large reluctance to drag people currently. Like we don't want to accidentally cancel someone who doesn't deserve it, obviously. And we want to make sure that we do our due diligence. But at some point, if everyone knows that this person is the perpetrator and you're still saying like, oh, we want to be sure, we like, they're really important to our company, so we want to retain them. Like at what point is the due diligence done and the punitive measures should begin?
Right. So I don't want to do this, but is there anyone you want to call out now? Or
so there was someone that I did call out on TikTok, but I have since taken the video down because this was a person who was a representative of a European Women's in Gaming Association who lured two women into his hotel room under the pretext of like allowing them to pitch something to him and then sexually assaulted them. So I'm in a like women in games leadership Discord group, and we were all talking about that person. Like, we had his face, we had his LinkedIn profile, we had his full name, but the two women decided that they didn't want to pursue this, and they didn't want his name to be out there or them to be associated with him. So we took everything down.
Were they worried that it would impact their future in games?
Maybe, I don't know. I didn't speak directly to them. It was I just heard from one of the other organizers of that Discord that we should respect the victim's wishes and for now not say anything.
Right. Yeah. So this isn't in tech. Well, this isn't in games, but it's in tech. I've seen some misogynistic behavior at my own workplace. And it wasn't directed at a specific person, but there were women on the team, and I basically said, "Are you going to go to HR about this?" And she said, "No, I'm just going to ignore it." I'm like, "Okay," because it wasn't great. It was kind of. It's kind of what Trump would say about it being locker room talk or whatever, which certainly doesn't make it great when it's in public.
Yeah, I mean, we do as women, now I'm speaking for all women, have experienced a certain amount of social conditioning to things like this, like these uncomfortable topics where it's like, oh, if you are a woman in a workplace, sometimes you will just get harassed, and your role is to not make trouble and not make a stink, because that's unprofessional, or that's like not being a team player. And I think it's time for women and other marginalized people to start being more noisy about these things and call out the bad behavior, even if it potentially creates a slightly more uncomfortable workspace for someone else. Like, you're already uncomfortable, so.
Right. We had Valentina actually do the podcast last year.
Yeah.
And we were talking about some of these issues, and she didn't experience too much of this. She said her boss was an ally, but at times he would do things like, "Oh, you should smile more," or something like that. But also advocated for her and got her good raises and good projects and stuff. So it was kind of a catch-22. He probably didn't do it intentionally. It was probably more of a just leftover from whatever conditioning he had when he was younger.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Looks like we've got a long way to go, though. It's especially in games.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's important for people who are allies to be praised for their allyship and the work that they are intentionally doing, but also because they do have these good intentions, to make them aware of the things that they might not know that they are doing to make you uncomfortable, like the subconscious biases that they might have.
Guess I sometimes take this for granted, that it's like I sort of think that in this day and age, everyone should be aware as much as they can of their own behavior and how it can impact others. I mean, everyone has bad days too, but there's a certain behaviors that just aren't okay.
Yeah, and just be humble and be willing to hear it.
Yeah,
you're not going to be perfect because you grew up in your own structures that might have trained you or ingrained certain ideas in you. But as long as you're flexible and willing to change them or adjust, I think that's a path toward improvement.
Okay. I think we should pivot to something happier.
Okay, sure.
So all the stuff you're working on, all your game stuff, let's talk about that.
Yeah. All the stuff. Well, full-time, I work at Heart Machine, which is a studio based out in Los Angeles, best known for Hyper Light Drifter.
That's a good game.
Released Solar Ash. Oh my gosh, was it? Yeah, over a year ago now. And we are working now on Hyper Light Breaker.
So what do you do for them?
So it is still a small studio, even though we are about 50 people now. It operates like a small studio. So I wear a lot of hats. I handle all of our PR, community, marketing, and social. And when there is a release, like post-release of Solar Ash, for instance, I also do some stuff on the QA side.
Okay.
So it's just a lot of different things. Yeah.
How much can you talk about the game? Because it's obviously not necessarily, you don't have permission to do that necessarily, or do you?
I'm able to talk about Breaker for the most part. Like we've been doing the press circuits now, so
I'm actually not
gameplay is out, and yeah.
So what kind of game is it? Because I'm actually not familiar.
Oh yeah, it's an online co-op multiplayer roguelite open world game. So all of the buzzwords in one game. Yeah.
Is everything procedurally generated and
Yeah,
all that?
everything
Okay.
is procedurally generated in a very intentional way. We want it to feel like the world makes sense and it's not just like random things thrown in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So online, open world, roguelite.
Yeah.
All right. I'll definitely check it out. Specifically that genre doesn't usually catch my interests, so to speak. But we'll definitely make sure that we post all the info in the description of the podcast here and that people can check it out. But Hyperlight Drifter was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that one.
And we get a lot of feedback from people that why didn't you just make it just like Hyperlight Drifter?
Why don't you make the same game over again? Yeah.
But honestly, Hyperlight Drifter came at a good time in the history of Kickstarter and indie games. Like, I do not think Drifter would be nearly as successful if it came out today as it did in Kickstarter 2013, and
that was
then
a long time ago now.
2016 is when it like actually came out. So, oh, there goes Garrett.
I'm sure he'll be back.
Okay.
I think he's trying to fix his audio finally.
Yeah.
So actually, now that you mentioned that, what do you think of Kickstarter now? Is it still a valid option for indies? Because my thoughts are not really, but I know there's still some going on.
I think it's just another marketing platform at this point. It's not a valid way to actually get your game funded. Like hundreds of thousands of dollars for a game project just isn't really feasible or realistic to raise on Kickstarter.
So would you say that Heart Machine is more of a AAA kind of indie?
We're always talking about what we are, and I think that's what it is, like AAA, AA category.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think it's getting harder for indies to actually compete? Because sometimes I think the bar is now set too high for indies.
Compete with what?
Just other like I and AAA. I don't think the market necessarily differentiates that. Usually a studio of 50 people has more resources and more money to do more than a studio like with Gary and I, who just the two of us. Actually, we got Sondalo as well in Spain, but they're very small, limited resources, not doing it full time.
So you mean just the commercial space in general, right?
Any titles to break out, and the fewer resources you have, especially if you're not focused on grabbing market share, the harder it is to like be very successful.
I'm hoping that because we're doing a JRPG, which isn't an oversaturated area of the indie space yet, although there are a lot more coming down the pipe, but fortunately every indie RPG that I know is at least a decade-long development, so it's still a very hard space to get oversaturated. But there are more of them still, so I'm hoping that gives us a bit of an edge. Yeah,
and like games are getting easier to make. There are more and more tools out there.
I'm worried about AI.
Coding, AI is a thing. Like ChatGPT has allowed people to create more things much more easily and quickly. AI art is also like a hot topic and interesting.
It seems to be controversial in some respects. Actually, Gary and I are going to do a podcast about AI and the impact on video games. But our artist right now does use some AI generated art, but just for concept, and then he actually goes over and creates the actual
makes a lot of
art
sense
and art
to use
style.
it to like iterate or test things out. But yeah, I mean, overall, I really appreciate how much more accessible it is to make games just for everyone, but it does create a lot more competition. Yeah.
Nice. So what else are you doing aside from Heart Machine? Do you have any other side projects that you're doing? Because you said you're an avid tabletop gamer, or do you make them too? Or
I am working on a currently untitled game that is an alt control cabinet game.
What does that mean?
So it's going to be a 4-player beat 'em up.
Oh, sweet.
4-player beat 'em up cabinet game. But the alt control part is. So have you played Don't Starve together?
No, I haven't played that one.
So it's a game where there's like hordes and waves of enemies that come on a day-night cycle. And at night, the enemies are stronger and start attacking your camp. You're camping. And the way to fend off the enemies and boost your own stats is you have to keep your fire going because that keeps
The enemies away.
keeps the enemies away. And the cabinet is going to be built around having a very heavy wooden stick in the center console that you have to physically rotate really fast to keep the fire going and make it
Oh, neat.
hot and big. And so there's like a physical exhaustion mechanic to it where like the person who's spinning the spinner, and it's going to be heavy, has to take their hands off the controller like from fighting monsters and like physically spin this.
So this is why it needs to be
fire-making
multiplayer
stick.
because
Yeah, and so the other players have to like jump in and
And
help,
okay,
and then you
easy.
like take turns with the stick, and
that's a neat idea.
yeah.
So for those arcade cabinet games, one thing I've always wanted to know is how does this is gonna, without sounding rude, how does that market actually work? What are the economics of this? Or is it just for fun? Is it just a piece of art?
Yeah, so I am also, aside from being involved with Gumbo, I'm on the board of directors and the current vice president of a organization called Death by Audio Arcade, which creates indie arcade cabinets. And I can say that we make no money on the cabinets. Like absolutely not. We apply for grant funding in order to build some of the cabinets. We also have generous donors that give us some amount of money to fund like basic materials. But otherwise, they really are passion projects that we do in partnership with the game developers who make the software that go in the
But
cabinets.
the games that go in the cabinets, do they get a return? I mean, I know I know Jonah's working on Friendly for Kung Fu Kickball. I know he sold a few, but I just wonder how do those, I wonder if there's any of them that are truly like a runaway success, especially the arcades really kind of not really being much of a thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like Bumble Bear Games, which is also New York based, they made Killer Queen.
Yeah,
that is
that's-
wildly successful.
Okay,
right?
yeah, that was a good game.
They are able to sell their cabinets to all the big tech companies because it's a very interesting concept. It's like
okay, so they'll buy the they'll buy the cabinet.
They buy the
in
cabinet,
rec room
and
or
then
whatever.
the developers get a cut of
Okay.
Whatever profit is made.
Interesting. So okay. So is Jonah working with you on his cabinet, or
Jonah worked with DBAA on the original Kung Fu Kickball.
Okay.
I think he is now working with Mark, who is the founder of DBAA, but also runs his own fabrication side hustle called Clebetronics. And I think he and Jonah are working on like creating more cabinets.
Do you have anything else you want to chat about or cover, or?
No, I think I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah, we just put 30 minutes. So, all right. Yiyi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
We'll
Thank you,
chat
Yiyi.
again.
Cool. Yeah. Good to
And
see
Gary's
you. Gary.
waving.